Okay. What's going on, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream interview on Mika Says Ukasa. Of course, as always, I am your humble host, Niko House. Today, I have a special and yet interesting guest. A lot of you may have seen him in previous interviews on the Jimmy Dore Show and also the Convo Couch. We're going to be talking to the Boogaloo boy, Magnus Panvidya, and what we're going to be discussing is the hopefully dispelling of some myths, maybe proving of some fact. But overall, I wanted to give Magnus an opportunity to honestly just do what the mainstream media will not do, which is give their side of the story, because I do believe all people should have the opportunity to tell their story. So before we have Magnus on, though, I do want to go ahead and let you all listen to his speech, which kind of drew everybody's attention initially, that he gave in Lansing, Michigan. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull it up for you. If it ever comes up again. Or it's not going to come up, but I'm let me pull it up. Oh, you know what? I forgot to exit out. So I'm going to pull it up in a second. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and welcome to the show, Magnus. What is going on, Magnus? Thank you so much for coming on, man. I know we were supposed to do Sunday, but you were gracious enough to grace the show with your presence today. So I appreciate it, man. How you doing?
Good. And yeah, no, thank you for having me on. That's what I keep telling everybody. I'm just some random idiot that I guess put some good words together that sounded nice, you know. So I'm appreciative of everybody else for speaking to me and letting me try to push what we're trying to do here. So
yeah, I mean, like we talked about right before the show, I'm big on accountability of movements. And when people begin to dodge interviews, that's when I generally get worried. But I generally become more intrigued when I see people who are, you know, kind of dealing with controversial topics or a controversial group. Whenever you embrace interviews and embrace that conversation, despite the differences you might have with the person who may be interviewing at the time, that has always been of some intrigue to me. And that's why I want to give you a chance to tell your story. So really quick, just like let people know who you are, what you're about, and briefly what the Boogaloo Boys are about from your vantage point.
Okay, so yeah, I've just kind of been like a lifelong activist. I used to be an environmental activist for a long time, and then increasingly over the years, kind of as a lot of the left-wing activism petered out during the early Obama years and stuff, I got really heavily involved with libertarian and Green Party politics and everything like that, kind of third-party stuff. And then at the beginning of last year, everything with the Breonna Taylor events, everything with Duncan Lemp, like the general chaos around the elections and the lockdowns, I started more and more meeting up with guys that had that same kind of persuasion of me of like, we like firearms and everything like that, but we're not really conservative dudes. We have, libertarian or progressive policies. We're, much more racially diverse, much more, sexually diverse.
Yeah. So overall, y'all are actually new.
Very new. The memes are like 10 years old. Like, the memes have been up here forever. As a movement, we could barely a year old at this point.
Okay, I didn't know that. So I just learned something new already, because I thought that y'all had been around and maybe during times of crisis like what we saw, that's what kind of brought y'all back out. But I didn't know that y'all are actually newly formed. It's kind of cool how y'all were able to organize so quickly around such an important issue.
Yeah, it definitely, like, I had a conversation on Convo Couch and everything of the Duncan Lemp situation, which is very underreported in the media, of a Maryland man that was shot and killed in a no-knock raid within 48 hours of Breonna Taylor's getting shot and killed in a no-knock raid.
You talked about that.
We he was part of the militia. He was like, like a libertarian kind of dude that, owned guns.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and like we were like, hey, this is going on right now. It's nationwide, like, police accountability protest. Let's go have a protest for Duncan Lemp because he died under exact same circumstances. Nobody showed up. Like it was just a bunch of anarchists and libertarians. The conservatives didn't show up. The 3%ers didn't show up. All these traditional right-wing groups didn't bother to show up to his wake or his vigil or anything. And that was kind of the moment where we're like, okay, we need to become our own thing, because like we have nothing in common with you folks. You don't stand for what you stand for, and we're done with it, and we're going to push for something different. So that was kind of like the exact moment after his death where we formed into our own thing.
So let me go ahead and show people, because in that same light, it's very similar to the speech, or very emblematic of the speech that you gave on the Capitol in Lansing that day. And it was really just a speech of solidarity, the recognition that these parties, or whatever parties people choose to affiliate with, or these ideologies, or whatever ideology they choose to affiliate themselves with, seems to be completely and totally inconsequential when it comes to just acknowledging basic reality that all of us are going through, and that if we are going to ever get to the point of addressing our partisan divisions, then we have to at least address these main issues that seem to be brought to us exclusively by the establishment. So let's go ahead and show everybody this clip of you speaking in Michigan from the Jimmy Dore interview that you just did. Oh, actually, let me make sure they can hear you. Oh, you might not. Give me a second, everybody. Make sure y'all can hear it.
But only 24 hours to unanimously agree to give billions of dollars to foreign tyrannical governments and corporations. A government that has bombed villages overseas my entire life for my supposed safety here.
Y'all gotta hear that whole heater. I'm gonna tell you what I felt when I first heard it, because one of my audience sent it to me like the day before you went on Jimmy's show.
Antifa, Boogaloo, and right-wing militias, they are the antibodies, not the disease that is destroying our country. The disease is a country run by two corrupt political parties that do not care about you. So deeply incestuous with corporations that they are indistinguishable from each other. A government that spent 6 months debating whether to give their own people $600, but only 24 hours to unanimously agree to give billions of dollars to foreign tyrannical governments and corporations. A government that has bombed villages overseas my entire life for my supposed safety here. This is a call for unity. For all of American people that realize the true threat against us to come together. For every mother mourning her children that was killed by police, for every business crushed down by state lockdowns, for every broken soldier sent to fight wars that have no point. This is our last chance to avoid either a tyrannical government or a bloody and pointless civil war among American people who do not have that much against each other and have more in common than they realize.
So, I'm gonna be honest with you, Magnus. I'm gonna be honest with you. If I was if I was just vulnerable and gullible, you just sold me right there off that one speech. To be honest, I'm gonna be honest with you. So I immediately actually began to research you guys the moment that I watched this, because I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Because the first thing I saw when I typed in Boogaloo Boys was, oh, they're a right-wing militia who tried to kidnap somebody. I'm like, for those of you who don't know, I have a smear piece about me written by the Huffington Post, and most of it is either lies or, they mischaracterize what you've done. And so I understand that when the mainstream media just immediately puts up this crazy inflammatory article about who you are and what you stand for, it's usually because something else is at play. And so that's basically what I gathered from the interview with you and Jimmy Dore. But can you speak a little bit about the mainstream smears against you?
Yeah, so they totally went through this kind of these layers of denial about us, because we were around for 6 months going to BLM events and everything all across the country, and we got no coverage. Nobody mentioned anything about us. Even if we were front and center at an event, you wouldn't see the media discuss us at all. Mm-hmm. And the movement kept growing and growing and growing, and we were going to more events. We were attending more vigils. In Louisville, we had the United Pharaohs Guard, which is part of our movement. They're Boogaloo Boys. They were at every single protest for 63 days straight and never got a single bit of mainstream media coverage. Wow. And then the moment we kind of broke through and the smears really started coming through was in the summer, we decided to put on a unity event where pretty much the same thing I've been saying, where we got together in Lansing and we invited local militia and we invited local BLM and everything. And we advanced this weeks in advance. Announced this weeks in advance. Well, then all of these articles start coming out about how like we're domestic terrorists, we're right-wing extremists, like we want to kill people and start the civil war and everything, and we're neo-Nazis.
I noticed there wasn't a single interview, by the way, from any of these mainstream. Like there wasn't even couldn't be reached for comment. They just immediately painted you all in a broad brush.
Yeah, Vice News were the only people that actually talked to one of our members in Virginia, and they just included us in like pieces that were like growing right-wing extremism in America, even though like not a single person has identified as right-wing. We have never told anybody we're right-wing. We've always told people that we're either libertarians or anarchists, because that's everybody. And then like, more and more these articles started coming out smearing us and, just writing all this nonsense about us. And right around that time, we all got banned off of Facebook. So I would get in arguments with people and be like, hey, we're not what we said we were. Here's all this proof and information and live streams of us at the Breonna Taylor events, of us marching with BLM protesters, of us being welcome at these protests. All of that got deleted off the internet. And if you follow my Twitter, the best part of my Twitter is having people reach out to me and like, here's all this evidence that was deleted off the internet. And I've just slowly been like, as it's given to me, reposting. So
funny enough, I was trying to figure out how legitimate you are and if you were an honest actor. I know that's like a rare thing in journalism nowadays, but some of us still do that. And I've came across a tweet of a journalist who was at an event that you all were at, the Proud Boys were at, and Antifa and some other leftists were at as well. And when the cops, I'm not sure if you were at this event, but they were talking about the fact
I wasn't, but I had good friends with me and people that were in the Capitol with me that day.
So you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Where the cops walked up, and then when the Boogaloo Boys actually stood over with the leftists, then y'all were being actually attacked by the Proud Boys.
Yeah, and we ended up
criticized.
Two of our members ended up getting into a fist fight with about 6 or 7 of them because they were surrounding a very small black woman compared to these huge, ripped white dudes. They surrounded her and they were screaming "All lives matter besides black babies," which is like an abortion meme, I guess. And they were terrifying
meme.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And they were terrifying this woman. So my buddy Shy Ray, which is the dude that has the Liberty spikes in that picture, walked up to him and was like, "Back off! Like we're gonna end up getting fight if you don't leave this woman alone." And sure enough, the Proud Boys pushed them and they yelled at each other and ended up having to fight all these dudes. So it's like, and the media doesn't cover any of that. It's only people like Ford Fisher and other on the ground journalists that actually like realize what's going on. That we have straight up like been shot with we've been shot with rubber bullets, we've been arrested, we've been tear gassed, and we've fought both the cops and right-wing protesters on the side of BLM all summer long.
And I noticed y'all haven't had any casualties. It's probably because of the fact that you all are guys and white and have guns.
Well, that's the one thing. We do have one casualty, which is Garrett Foster, which is another thing nobody talks about. He was shot and killed in Austin protecting BLM protesters, particularly his disabled wife, who is a POC woman that he was married to in a wheelchair.
I remember he was he was a Boogaloo boy.
Yes, he was a Boogaloo boy, open and proud about it.
They never talked about that in any coverage of his death, though.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is so many people are like, "Oh, you guys are crazy neo-Nazis," and yet BLM put a giant vigil on for one of us, and we attended that vigil in like 30 deep. And he, even JJ McNabb, which is like an extremist expert for Washington State University, has this giant thread being like, "Yeah, here's all the proof that Garrett Foster was an open Boogaloo boy." So it's like, and he literally died. He literally died protecting BLM protesters. So that's why like a lot of us get frustrated of like why we get slandered and smeared so much, because we have injuries and a death for this movement.
So interestingly enough, I remember that the reporting from that basically was they were framing it like he was only exclusively there to protect his wife, basically. And that's why, and like he got shot in the crossfire or something like that. But he was a veteran and like was killed. And they kept showing pictures of his wife, and it's bizarre to me because I ain't gonna lie, I have a bias, right? I'm biased because I have an affinity for flowered outerwear, okay. And also I hear a lot of people talking behind cameras and on their desks and on the little podcasts and on their YouTube shows, whatever. A lot of these white guys and white women, but I've never seen a single one of them that have called you all without credibility, in my opinion, white supremacists when they have never in their lives put their body on the line for a black life. And that's a different line. And being that you have been in the line of fire, so to speak, in that regard, that's different than just being behind a camera. It's different than giving these flowery speeches in front of these massive crowds or doing donations or fundraisers. Putting your body on the line for a black life it makes you not only a traitor to to their quote unquote the conservative cause, but it makes you a traitor racially in a lot of these people's eyes. And they will treat you the same, if not worse, in some cases where they can get away with it. Is that basically what you've experienced?
Yeah.
Like you get called race traitor and things like that?
Oh yeah, my Proton mail, which I set up just for contact, is just full of tons of racial slurs, homophobic slurs, race traitor, like all these just, lovely things. And then on the other side, I'm getting called a Nazi. So I'm really getting it from both ends. And definitely
I've been called a Nazi too, actually.
and definitely like on the ground, like a lot of these, like especially the Proud Boys get real aggressive with us in particular, because, they're kind of used to facing down BLM protesters or skinny white kids in black clothes or whatever. But then they see us and they I don't know, just something short circuits in their brain, and they just go all like ape mode and really aggressive with us, even though we have firearms. Because I think it's to your point of you're guys with guns. You're supposed to be on our team. How dare you? And it's like, sorry, man. I've just seen too much, because we didn't have when our organization started, we didn't have an openly antagonistic opinion of them. Obviously, we were the same with everyone. We're not conservatives. We hate Trump, whatever, but they're just another group. But over the summer, we had probably 6 different instances of that event in Ohio where we got in a fight with them, 2 events in Michigan where we got into it with them. In Washington, D.C., one of our members got jumped at that protest where they ripped that banner down and burnt it.
Nobody covers the fact that y'all are getting in fights with the Proud Boys.
Yeah, never. And I sent the video to Ford Fisher of my friend. He was in Washington, D.C. marching with BLM supporters, unarmed because it's D.C., and he had a BLM patch on his plate carrier, his bulletproof vest. And these 3 Proud Boys are walking up after the event, a mile away from where the protest happened, and they see that he has a BLM patch on his plate carrier, and they just jump him and beat the shit out of him.
Wow.
So it was after that exact moment, we're all right, screw you guys. We tried to be diplomatic with everyone, but you've burnt that bridge through your actions.
Which is different. Exactly. That's different.
That's
different. That means you just have no regard for human life.
Yeah, you really are. It's to them, it's just extreme team sports. Their whole organization is showing up to public events and getting into fist fights with counter protesters. That's the only thing. That's the only thing they give a shit about. And
I'm
it's
sure that the Proud Boys co-founder or founder, being his, I don't know if you know, he was, ironically enough, he was a co-founder of Vice News, which is largely funded by the Canadian government. Before he was a left winger. I'm not talking about Tario. I'm talking about who turned out to be a Fed, McInnes, by the way.
Yeah, Tario is a Fed, but Gavin McInnes, he's a super weird character. Very weird individual.
It's like I said, that's what was bizarre to me is the Proud Boys, quote unquote, have been force fed down our throats by the media. To be fair, Tario gives them a lot of stuff to report, but on the other side of that fence, once again, I would say CNN has been nothing but glowing towards Antifa. Whereas once again, and everybody knows that I've had my questions about the legitimacy of both of the national level movements. But with the Boogaloo Boys, once again, it was different. Now I do have to ask you, so the question I would pose to both, if there was some representative leader of Antifa or Tario, if I met him, in situations like with Standing Rock, for example, Ferguson, Missouri, where we saw activists, leaders really they either disappeared or died. Where were the Boogaloo Boys at that point? I know that you said y'all formed a little bit later, so I imagine that would be part of it. But where was the organization there? And if it was a George Floyd thing specifically that sparked the movement, what was it that was different about the George Floyd protest?
I think just because when the first round of the BLM kind of protests and everything happened, it seemed it was very intense for a while, and then nothing really came out of it. Nothing really changed. There was no giant police reform, So I think like a lot of people kind of just felt that the spirit of resistance in America was kind of just dead, and we were just going to slowly slide off. And then Trump got elected, so it's like, okay, we're just going to slide even further. But definitely around like the George Floyd events, like we definitely felt like, oh, like no, like people will they will get mobilized, they will go out, they will still protest, because there wasn't a lot of street protests besides like, you know, small things like the Million Women's March, or, you know, the Women's March in DC and everything. But there wasn't a lot of
march
like,
on the Pentagon.
Local, there wasn't a lot of like local organization stuff going on. So definitely when we saw that people were like getting riled up and everything, we got involved with that. But the other reason is during the original BLM events, there wasn't a lot of right versus left violence. It was mostly like police interfering or attacking protesters or vice versa or whatever, to where this last year, like, Proud Boys and Antifa types fighting are at like every single event. You had militias and counter protesters showing up with guns to events to like counter BLM events. You had the police going insane to a degree never seen before in terms of using like, you know, riot munitions and stuff like that on peaceful crowds. Yeah. So that was kind of the thing. Like we came together like, well, what do we have to offer? Well, we're armed and we're willing to go up there. So this is kind of like a moment we could get involved. And then obviously there wasn't really the demand back then, and especially now with like how gun rights are sort of changing, when you have, you know, like the Armed Equality Movement, which is an LGBT militia. You have the Socialist Rifle Association. You have the Black Panthers kind of coming back.
Yeah, no one ever actually talks about the left-wing militias. They don't
like
ever say if you're a militia, then you have to be necessarily right-wing, which isn't true.
Yeah, you have like NFAC, you have Panthers, you have, you know, John Brown Gun Club, you have all these kind of organizations popping up. So we kind of built to a mass that it was good enough that we could start showing up, because you never want to be the one dude. You want, you know, you need people to watch your back, especially if you're showing up somewhere, anywhere with a firearm. Don't be the lone guy. Yeah, or you're gonna have a stupid Kyle Rittenhouse situation. You don't want that. That's the worst possible scenario.
Yeah, so let me just say too. So as a black man who's participated in these protests, it is very much so appreciated. And because you brought up this point, and I talk about this regularly too, there is no one in this country who is treated worse than a black male who carries a gun.
Absolutely.
Right? They get the shittiest end of the stick. You're going to be killed because you have the gun. If you defend yourself with the gun, you're going to get the shitty end of the stick. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so realistically, as an individual, you cannot show up to one of these protests, even if you are trying to protect yourself, even if you are in an open carry state. It's not how the real world works. And so for you all, once again, to put your bodies on the line, like I said, so basically you're saying the campaign, the awareness of the campaign for George Floyd, and the justice that they were seeking there, it's kind of like what let y'all know that there was a national movement of people like you, because it's hard organizing for something like this based off of just who's around your area. Right. Yeah. So I imagine it was a national level of the awareness for that. But
absolutely.
Yeah, just going to these protests and putting your bodies on the line, that's no small feat. It really isn't. And so let me get some of these super chats real quick. I want to ask you another question. Kristen Saunders, thank you very much for the super chat. Mad Wolf, bravo, Neek, for this interview. People need to hear it. Yeah, I agree. That's why I definitely wanted to make sure we got Magnus on. So speaking of Kyle Rittenhouse, now you come under attack a little bit for your comments about the whole situation with Kyle Rittenhouse. So I'm actually going to defer to you a bit here because I wasn't there. And I do know that on the ground situations are a lot different than what they may seem like to somebody who's out here. So I would love to hear you give like your actual explanation rather than, you know, getting into this 140 to 280 character back and forth on Twitter. Can you go ahead and give your rendition of those events?
Yeah, so my whole thing is I just have a universal principle of self-defense, and a lot of people have zeroed in on the Rittenhouse situation but have ignored what I've said about other things. Because in that same thing of explaining about Rittenhouse, I also said that Ahmaud Arbery had the right to shoot those two dudes that went after him if he had a gun. Mm-hmm. He had all the right to defend himself. He wasn't committing any crime in that moment. That was fine. The right got mad at me about that. And then when you go to the Rittenhouse situation, I've made it very clear in that tweet too, they just cropped it out, of I don't think he should have been there. I think the adults that he showed up with should have not left him alone, which is kind of like a bit of detail that gets left out. He showed up with a bunch of militia dudes that then left a fucking 17-year-old with a rifle.
Yeah, no one ever, no one,
which is insanity. Insanity that you would ever do that you would leave someone you're responsible for in that situation. And then I've taken it even further to say that the two guys that went after Rittenhouse afterwards, that didn't know the situation and just thought that it was an active shooter, those people are warriors. I think it's very brave and stupid what they did trying to stop someone with a rifle with a skateboard, but like that's some warrior stuff. Like that's really brave, you know? So I get beef from both the right and the left, to where I say the first guy that went after Rittenhouse was justified and the left will get mad at me. But then I say that the two dudes that he shot afterwards were really brave for trying to do what they did. And the right gets mad at me. So, you know, I understand that's spicy to some people, but definitely like the gotcha tweet that's been going around is very much lacking the context of, you know, me saying that, oh yeah, I use the same logic for Ahmaud Arbery. Like Ahmaud Arbery, if Ahmaud Arbery had a rifle and those two dudes went after him, I would cheer him on.
Yeah. So you're saying, so basically what you're saying is like the first guy who thought that he was an active shooter was justified. But
no, the bald dude that ran after him in the parking lot and ended up that got him in between everything, and the guy behind him that shot the pistol in the air, those dudes are assholes.
Got you.
Yeah, the two dudes afterwards, the guy with the skateboard and the medic that got shot in the arm, that had no idea what was going on, just heard people saying active shooter and a white kid running with a rifle. Those two dudes are warriors.
So that's got you. Understood. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's an outrageous take at all. Once again, especially because I don't have all the information. Like I literally was not there.
Right.
But
a lot of people say Rittenhouse was a Boogaloo boy, which he wasn't. And we did have people on the ground, but they're actually in the video before the shooting happened, trying to grab Trump supporters and pull them away from the protesters and telling them to go inside that gas station. Because they were out in the street, like they're there to protect the gas station, but they're out in the street yelling at protesters. So you literally see my buddy Luke. You see my buddy Luke in those videos. If you go back and watch the gas station videos, he's literally going up and grabbing them by the collar and pulling them and saying, "Go inside, because he knew what was about to happen. And sure enough, all the militia dudes leave. We leave. Rittenhouse is running around low, and what happens. So we even in the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, we had people on the ground that were trying to stand between right-wing people and left-wing people and prevent violence and stupid shit from happening.
Yeah, because here's what people don't understand. Kyle Rittenhouse, 17 years old. I have a lot of problems with that whole situation, but he's 17 years old. His life is going to probably be ruined forever. The person who is now dead, who's left-wing, he's dead, so he doesn't have a life anymore, unfortunately. And
two of them,
this entire situation was preventable. And if we would have, like, once again, this is what happens when people feel like they can no longer talk to the other side, when they have to be on their toes because they think the other side wants to kill them all the time. And you can't cultivate these relationships because now two people have lost their lives in one form or another. And what was solved because of that?
Yeah. Nothing changed. Nothing better happened. Nothing changed from the Rittenhouse situation. It's just made everything worse. So that's exactly, the kind of things that you have to be very aware of showing up to these events and stuff like that. Of like, if you screw up, someone's going to die. Yeah, and it might be you. You might be the person dying, and it's going to cause problems for everybody. So there's definitely a very huge burden of responsibility on every one of us. Of like, we need to be as intelligent and as respectful and diplomats as much as warriors on the ground to accomplish what we're doing and not have anything awful or horrible happen.
Yeah, there's absolutely a happy medium. Once again, I always joke with people because they are kind of surprised, but I always say I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. I think there should be more militias. I think there should be a lot more left-wing militias given the history of this country and their treatment towards left-wing activists. I do believe, once again, that we should also, like, just because you believe in militias and you believe in gun safety, like, that's to protect the First Amendment, you know what I'm saying, not to take it away. And if you are going to be in a militia, it should always be to protect the less fortunate or people trying to, protect their constitutional rights. And so I appreciate, I like I said, people say militia like it's a bad thing. I don't know why. And it's probably because of the propaganda, but they're not inherently bad. And we should have more people who are in militias, because there is I don't know about you guys, but I know that a lot of militias like train, right? They train.
Well, that's the other thing we do is, like, our organization is kind of split 50-50 to where we have a lot of guys that go out to protest and do everything you've seen I've talked about, and like people like me that are giving, public speaking and stuff like that. The other half of the movement are essentially just like prepper dudes that just all they do is practice, train. A lot of us, particularly Mike Dunn in Virginia, his entire militia and everything he does to pay his bills is particularly training POC people how to use firearms.
Oh, wow.
Even in his Vice News documentary, he was training people from his community on how to use firearms. So that's kind of the other thing that we've done is like reaching out to people, particularly, you know, because we don't want to hijack these events. That's something we're all very, very like aware and important that we don't do. That if we're showing up to a Breonna Taylor event, we're not like, hey, by the way, you want to talk about guns? Like, that's not it. But we definitely had like a lot of people approach us afterwards. And they're like, I don't know anything about it. I'm worried about my life. Obviously, the cops don't give a shit about us and they're not going to show up. Worst case scenario, they're going to show up to hurt me. Yeah. Like, can you teach me about firearms? And we've done a lot of that.
That's like I said, it's necessary. Killer Mike is big on that too.
Killer Mike's one of my heroes.
Oh man, dog! I remember he said, "You're not ready for a revolution if you don't know how to fish." And I was like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" Then he starts going into detail, like, and he starts listing off all these basic things that the average person can do, which basically, you know, what is going to be necessary for you to do if you're not going to rely on the government or any of the structures within this empire. And he's absolutely right. And that's kind of what made me start thinking about my previous stance on the Second Amendment, which I wasn't against it, but I was definitely probably a little bit more, I don't want to say anti-Second Amendment, but like limitations on like the type of gun you can own. Like that was something that I was about like, I don't know if we should have assault rifles. Now I'm like, as long as you're not crazy and you don't have a history of using guns in some fucked up way, I don't see why you shouldn't be able to have an assault rifle. If this soldier, Mr. Soldier over here can have an assault rifle, or this SWAT team guy over here can have an assault rifle, well, bitch, I should be able to have an assault rifle. What if they come into my house? You know? So
that's definitely like something like I think the left wing's kind of waking up to, because I shared a story of a woman from Tampa that went up to Kentucky for a Breonna Taylor event. Mm-hmm. And she described what happened they saw the police were chasing some young black man. They don't know why they were chasing him. It was during the protest. And he ran into the park where UPG was, which is, you know, our Boogaloo movement people there. And the cops stopped and they pulled their dogs back and they wouldn't go into the park because there was a bunch of people with guns. And that kid, whatever they were trying to beat that kid up for or whatever he did, he was fine. He was
all of a sudden it wasn't important anymore when they saw someone who could stand up to him.
Exactly. You know, if he was an actual criminal or did something really bad, I doubt they would have cared. But they're more than willing to put a rubber bullet in some, you know, hippie kid with a sign. But then they start seeing, you know, particularly mixed race militias, they're terrified of. Because if they see a bunch of white dudes, they'll just like walk up and be like, you know,
hey bro, what's up, man?
Hey fellow guys. And we've had like a lot of awkward conversations with like people that walk up and assume we're friends with them when it's like, no, which is why I started having to wear like fuck Trump stuff to events. So like people wouldn't assume. That's funny. That, you know, but yeah, we definitely had that. But if they see like a mixed race or kind of militia, they are horrified. And because, you know, at the end of the day, like these dudes don't care about what they're doing. It's just a job to them. They just want to, you know, crack some skulls and go home and laugh about it and drink some beers. They're not trying to get shot and they're not trying to get hurt. So when they see a bunch of dudes with rifles, they kind of, you know, reassert their priorities and like, maybe we won't club some protesters today.
It's crazy how much a gun will make somebody on the opposite side start to think a little bit more rationally. Right, it's crazy how that works.
Nobody wants to get shot.
Especially bullies. Bullies don't like bullying people who can defend themselves. So it defeats the whole point of bullying.
Absolutely. So and even then, kind of like, you know, to the point about like the unity and stuff and coming together on shared agreements. Like I went to all these BLM protests all summer long. I was surrounded by people that probably thought that I shouldn't legally be allowed to own that rifle, but we didn't talk about that because that's not why I was there. Yeah. I was there because I want to end no-knock raids. I'm there because I want police reform. Yeah. So that's kind of the thing of like why we want people, like maybe we don't agree on everything, but if we can agree on this thing, can we all just show up together and solve this problem and then go on to the next problem, whatever. And then when we finally run out of these things that we all know are horrible and wrong, then we can start screaming about all the things we disagree on.
Amen. I 100% agree, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Magnus. I greatly appreciate it. I want to say this too before we leave. I mean, basically the hue of most of the shows you've been on recently are mostly pink for a lot of those guys and girls. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. But I do want to say from this perspective, this whole idea of someone having to trying to ask you to police every single sect of your movement that go stupid, so to speak, I think is unfair. Like, yeah, there probably is a couple of white supremacists in your group, but like, I also know for a fact as a leftist, our movement it's filled with white supremacists who merely go about their business in a different way and go completely unchecked. And a lot of times they're celebrated. Obviously, Colin Powell, as a Republican, talked about the racists who were dominating his party. The Democratic Party deals with a lot of white supremacy. Every person, once again, who traffics in the idea that because one or two people have misrepresented, whatever organization you represent, they misrepresented and they consider themselves to be white supremacists, that you have to police every single one of them, in my humble opinion, is not fair. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to the people who are doing good with this organization. In any other scenario on the left, we would not say that, the parts are the totality of the sum. We wouldn't allow that from the right when they're talking about us. And so I do believe that it's not fair for all the attacks that you've been getting. Oh, what about that one person that did one thing? Like, we're not going to say that every single black BLM protester is represented by that one dumbass who decided to destroy a black small business. And I don't believe that should be, I don't believe that we should be doing that with y'all as well. So I just wanted to say that, from the perspective of a black man who deals with white supremacy from the left and the right all the time.
I appreciate that. And definitely, I guarantee that if I tried hard enough, I could go to enough BLM movement, events and find some crazy dude that wants to take over half of Texas and turn it into like a black supremacist ethno-nationalist state. But do I think that represents the movement of hundreds of thousands of BLM protesters? Like, no. And in the same event, you have like some BLM protesters that are like hardcore, just Democrat normies. And I'm like, I don't think that really represents BLM either. Like, It's too complicated for that. You can't boil people down to these boxes. It's especially when you have things that are so widespread and huge.
Mm-hmm. And that's what they attempt to muddy the waters and overcomplicate it so that people would just default to the instinct of, well, no, it has to be all or nothing. Right? Like, that's why I always tell people, just BLM, the 501c4 organization that donated almost all of their donations to Joe Biden's campaign, and just BLM, the movement that 501c4 was born out of, because they saw that it was legitimate and needed something that can make a lot of money. Same thing with Antifa, the organization, which is an organization from the 1930s, I love. And that's where the original the Black Power Fist came from. A lot of people don't know that. However, what it's become, which is we show up to Joe Biden or Donald Trump's inauguration, and burn the bitch to the ground. But during Biden's inauguration, y'all know where to be found. But I thought that we were supposed to be anti-fascist. But yet you have people who are picking and choosing when to fight fascism. Like, we have to be able to parcel up these groups and organizations and get into the nuance, because it's important so that we don't see what we saw, which is unfortunate. Like, in my opinion, y'all were unfairly painted as being a bunch of crazy people. And like that y'all are similar to like the Proud Boys, but yet once again, the story of how the Proud Boys don't like y'all should have been enough, but that never gets reported.
Right. That's the funniest thing is, like, so many times people are like, oh, Boogaloos did this awful thing. And I'm like, stop, read the story. Was it Boogaloo Boys or was it Proud Boys that are being called Boogaloo Boys? And 9 times out of 10, it's just Proud Boys. We had nothing to do to it. No one was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. None of us were involved. Proud Boys did something bad, and they just say Boogaloo and Proud Boys.
I love how you can instantly
we get into fist fights. Like, we get in fist fights every time we're in the same place together. Like, why are you associating us together?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's funny how y'all can immediately figure out if the story is bullshit. Like, if it wasn't really about y'all, like they were just trying to perpetrate y'all as somebody else. Like, hold up. There ain't no Hawaiian shirt in this goddamn photo. Who is they talking about? Can't be us.
Right. It's so surreal to me because, like, especially over Twitter over the last week, I get so many messages from people of like, oh, I was in like Denver and a Boogaloo boy pushed me to the ground and called me a bunch of names. And I'm like, was he wearing a Hawaiian shirt? And she was like, no. I'm like, it wasn't a fucking Boogaloo boy. Like, it was probably surprise. I was like, he was like, he was wearing a Trump shirt. And I'm like, yeah, that wasn't one of us.
Yeah, probably wasn't one of y'all. At least he wasn't there.
We've been very vocal of hating both parties and not liking Donald Trump for many, many reasons from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, that definitely wasn't one of us.
And appreciate everybody's super chats, by the way. And I want to say really quick too before we go, the fact that y'all believe all policing institutions are bad, it was like, that was it for me. I'm like, oh well, shit, they can't be bad if they think all. Because the people that I have like fundamental disagreements with believe in policing institutions without understanding their history. And we were like, no, you can't. Like, the whole reason we believe so much in the Second Amendment is because of X, Y, and Z. So why would we then support uncritically X, Y, and Z.
That's the biggest arguments we get in conservatives is their like worship of police, where it's like you're so terrified of gun control, but then who's going to come and take your gun if it passes? The cops. Like who are the people that are enforcing all these laws? The cops. If you're an anti-lockdown person, who's enforcing the lockdown? The cops. So it's like, why do you worship? Even from a conservative perspective, it's like, why do you worship these people?
It's conservatives who are supposed to have more disdain for policing institutions than leftists.
Right, it's like their whole like all of their heroes, whether it be like NASCAR drivers, whether it be like whiskey, even like the founding fathers. These were drug smuggling, illegal alcohol making, like hot rodding, cop shooting revolutionaries. So it's like, why do you like the cops so much? I don't get it.
Propaganda, man. Everybody is subject to it at some point. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you, Magnus, for stopping by. It's much appreciated. I really hope that you all continue to go on and train more people. And once again, cannot thank you enough for being willing to put your life on the line for black bodies in any capacity. Even if you were a Republican conservative, if you were willing to do that, that is more than what the majority of the boutique left has done for Black lives outside of, once again, just rage tweeting and bitching behind the camera as they make dollars off of our bodies laying in the streets. So thank you so much for that. For everybody else, thank you all for tuning into this live stream interview of Mika Says Tsukasa. And always remember, more than anything else, find your balance.